You, Ruben? Look at that. So, yeah, I'd just like to start open with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I just thank you that we have the opportunity to come here and praise and worship you. And I just thank you for Doug and Tammy hosting us, and that just for you providing such a beautiful day to do this. And I just pray that your words will flow through me, and that the message that you want will be spoken here this morning. And I just thank you for each person that's here and anyone that will watch this later. We just pray that it can be uplifting and meaningful for them as well. In your name we pray. Amen. So yes, most people know my name's Eric, and so a little bit about my testimony and who am I. So of course I'm many things, right? I'm a husband to Christine, of course, and happy anniversary, honey, tomorrow. She's put up with me 24 years officially. And yeah, I'm also a dad, and I'm a son. I'm a farmer, of course. I'm an elder. And there's probably a lot of things you don't know about me. And we hope to share some of those today, and just some of the things that have made me who I am. And it's actually an extremely appropriate song that we just sang, Me and God, because God's brought me along a lot of winding roads, I guess. And mostly that's because of my fault, because I'm a slow learner sometimes. And so I started off by my mom and dad, Henry and Cora, of course. They had 8 daughters, and then there was me, and had a kind of normal upbringing, right? I was raised in a Christian family, and went to church, and that was all very part of my normal life. I thought, kind of in my mind, everyone was a Christian, right? Went to Christian school, Timothy Christian School, and that was a huge blessing too. I got a lot of Bible knowledge there, a lot at home, and a lot at church. And I always think of that cord of 3 strands that is talked about. And it's really true, so I want to say that as an encouragement to parents. Just continue to do that. Teach your kids when they're young. And that's actually in Proverbs 22 as well, right? Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they'll not stray from it. And it's really important that we do that, because that's always kind of been one of my sayings, is that one of the most important jobs in the world is being, well, I would say a mom, because moms have so much influence on their kids when they're little. And you had them for 9 months in you, and then later on you spend so much time with them when they're little. And it's amazing the things that kids pick up and learn. So that's when I was praying about what I should talk about and how my testimony should go, God really placed it on my heart that it should be encouraging to people. And so that's one encouragement to start off with, is to especially the young parents, keep at it. Some days I'm sure that it's long, and you wonder, is it worth it? But I don't think I'm old, but my kids will tell you differently. But look at it in one way, kind of look at Christine and I now. We have 4 wonderful young people. They're all very strong. They're all talented, and God blessed us with that. And we were just a little bit faithful, but God really was a lot faithful, and that's why it's so important to always keep that in the forefront of your mind, to let God really work in or through you or in you, and as you go about everything. We often, I just heard this week when I was probably cutting hay or something, about being faithful to God. And lots of times we think, and it's important to come to church on Sunday, but it's all week, all throughout every part of your day. And he used the analogy of a marriage. He said, imagine if you told your wife, or your wife told her husband, I'll be faithful to you on Fridays, but the rest of the week, I can do whatever I want. You would probably say there's a little bit of problem with commitment. But unfortunately, we do that sometimes with God, don't we? We say, I'll give you this. I'll go to church, or even myself, I'll be an elder, I'll do whatever. But there's other things, I want to do what Eric wants to do. And as I grew up, that was kind of a lot of what my life was like. I went to a public school for high school, and that's when I really got introduced to a lot of people that had a different life outlook. Not everybody's a Christian, I found out really quickly. And I picked up a few bad habits there, especially one of the ones I struggle with the most, I'd say, or the worst ones, is my language. I can be pretty careless with the language, and I can use a lot of foul language sometimes. I like to think I'm getting better, and that's only the grace of God, but it's also being aware of it, right? If you don't recognize that you have faults, then you're not going to improve on them, right? So thankfully that's something that God's very patient with me and still working on me. But it's really easy to get in those bad habits and then think, oh, that's not a big deal. But to God it is, and sin is serious. And definitely I understand that I'm a sinner and that I need Jesus to save me from my sins. That's the only way. So after high school, I kind of was a normal thing or whatever through high school. I worked a lot at home, like doing chores before and after school. So I was in a few after-school activities, but not too much. And then I went to college, and I really had an enjoyable time there. I had a lot more free time and a lot of like-minded people on the side of things for what we wanted our careers to be, right? And I'm a pretty down-to-earth guy, and most of the kids, we're all kids, I guess, at that age, when you're 18 to 20, we're down-to-earth, and really had an enjoyable time because I'm a pretty social guy. That probably surprises no one. And so, yeah, I had a lot of free time then, right? Like, I thought chores was an everyday thing, but at college you only had to do chores for a week and 3 different barns. So I'm like, 3 weeks of chores a semester? This is like a joke. So it's one of the few things I got 100% on. And so I went to church every week, basically, while I was at college. But that's kind of all that my Christian life was, if you want to say. But I did had a friend there, and I knew there's something different about her. She was actually the one that said, hey, you ever go to church? And I'm like, yeah, I usually do. I'm kind of wondering where we're going to go on Sunday. And she's like, well, I found this church, my parents. So there's 4 or 5 of us went, and she was raised in the same type of church I was, a Christian Reformed church, but there was something different about her, and I said, that's interesting, that I know there's something, she has more than what I have, but I was still living for myself and pretty much content that way, right? I didn't have any, sometimes we need to have those challenges or struggles before we really seek what God wants us to do. And so I just went along, and then when I came back, after I graduated college, came back home to farm with my parents, and the church plant had started in Winchester, and I'm pretty sure it was Marika had called my mom and invited her to this church and talked about it, because when they started, which is now the Gathering House, was called Discovery Bible Fellowship, they called everyone in the phone book. A whole team of people went through and called everyone. So that's how my mom and Marika were speaking about that. And so I said, I'll check out this new church and see what it's about. And it was a Bible-believing church, a gospel message. But there was something about there. I finally started a little bit understanding grace. And not that I wasn't taught that when I was a kid, but I don't think I was able to hear it or understand it for whatever reason. And I'd say most of that is on me, because God definitely is not usually the problem whenever we have an issue. It's always us. And so I started going to that church fairly regular, and then of course there's a cute little blonde girl there, so I said, I really like this church. And so I mentioned that earlier. That's turned out to be my lovely wife, Christine. So anyway, so we dated fairly seriously, and we were talking about getting married, and then all of a sudden she said to me one night, I think I'm pregnant. So I know whose fault that was. That was all me. So that's when I really started understanding God's grace, and that doing things my way obviously wasn't right. And we were really amazed at our church community. Like, I went to the front and confessed that I was sinful, because that was pretty obvious. And our church was very gracious to us, and they forgave us. And that's when it really started to click in my head about how God's grace works and how much I needed it. Because maybe it's just me, but I think a lot of us as humans, we can be pretty prideful, and we can think that we don't need help and that we don't need anyone else either. We can do things on our own. But and that's in Romans 3:23, right? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and it's God's grace that saves us, and that each one of us needs. And so that's really one of my other encouragements. I want to really make that clear to everyone. We all need God's grace. We're all sinful, and it's important, I think, that we make it a personal thing, and because it's one thing to understand in our heads as a general, and that's important as well. But most importantly, you have to understand it on your own personal level. That, yeah, I'm sinful. I need Jesus to save me. No matter how good I am, because if people, we're really good, I think, as humans, looking around and say, oh, I'm not as bad as that guy. I've never stolen a car, or I've never cheated on my wife, or I've never robbed a bank, or whatever. You can always find someone that's worse than you, but it doesn't matter. It matters that you're sinful and you need Jesus. So, really hope and trust if nothing good comes out of this, that people will understand that part of the message. And if you've never made that commitment, today's the day. There's no better time than right now. So, anyway, I remember too, whenever, because of course I was an elder at the time too, which made it, you want to say that much more worse, because as elders and anyone in leadership, we're judged at a higher standard. We're called at a higher level, and obviously I had messed up. And so at that time, Andre was our pastor. And I remember he said that to me. He's like, I remember I learned this at school. Whenever you have a kid at a wedlock, the kid will think it's their fault. And I still remember saying that day, that doesn't make any sense. Why did the kid think that? Sure enough, I don't know, one day at supper we generally tried as a family to have dinners together, especially when the children were younger. And Lucas was a pretty sharp kid, those of you that know him, and pretty good at math. And he started asking questions about times and everything, and I think he was 7 or 8 at the time. And he's like, so, did you and Mommy have me before you were married? And I'm like, yeah. I said, well, technically afterwards, because we got married in August, but you were born in October, so yep. That's 3 months, not 9. And he's like, oh, so that's my fault then. And I'm like, are you kidding me? That's exactly what Pastor Andre said. And I'm like, absolutely not, buddy. It had nothing to do with you. I said, you're one of the few blessings from this. You're one of the good things. But I always found that curious. And I was really thankful at that time that Andre kind of warned us, if you want to say about that, because I never saw that coming. But who knows why that is or how kids think. But and that's one of the benefits of having those family dinners, and that your children are comfortable to talk to you about sometimes some uncomfortable things. But and it also helps them to know that you're a human and not perfect, because it's an important relationship to have with your kids, and to be transparent. And they already know that you're not perfect, so you're not hiding anything from them, but just be honest about it, right? So anyways, so a few years later, it seemed like Christine always was very good at writing a yearly letter just to let the family know, usually at Christmas time, what's going on. And so almost every year, either we had another child or she was expecting a child. And so we ended up with 4 great kids. And also almost every year, I had a pretty significant mishap or a close call. There's a few times that, and obviously God was trying to tell me something, and I was, like I said before, a slow learner. And that some car accidents where it's amazing that I survived, or with basically no. Another time, probably a 60, 70 pound silo hood blew off the top of the silo, which was 70 feet in the air, and it landed within like this far from me. And if it would have hit me, I probably obviously wouldn't be standing here. But Sim was there that day. He just mentioned it to me about a month ago. He goes, I remember that. And I'm like, don't worry, I remember that too. But finally, I clued in that, God wasn't done with me, and he wanted me to do more, and also to be much more aware that we don't know how much time we have. And our family was growing, and our farm was growing. I was milking in an old barn. I could only milk about 35 cows, and we wanted to expand a bit. And so when we looked at building stuff and the cost of that, and then we also looked at the opportunity of maybe buying another farm, and we found one, I call it, that was kind of perfect, but it was about an hour and a half away. And I still remember it seemed like a really reasonable deal, and unfortunately for them, the man that had farmed it, it was only like 2 or 3 years old, brand new barn he built, but he had passed away from cancer, so that's why they were selling the farm. And we looked around, and it was really curious. It was kind of like it was in a spiritual wasteland. There was no Christian schools. There was not really any Bible-believing churches that we could find back then. That was like 16, 17 years ago, so the internet was still a little bit more shaky, or Google was, especially to somebody like me. That there was, so that was a real drawback for us, but the farm and everything seemed ideal. And so we were kind of looking, and I still remember I prayed, I said, I need a really obvious answer, God, because I'm really kind of slow. And kind of like what Gideon had with when he laid out the sheepskin, and he said, I want dew all on the ground and the sheepskin to be dry. And then to test it, he goes, the next day I want the sheepskin to be wet with dew and the ground all around dry. That's in Judges 6. And so I said, I need a really obvious sign like that. That's the kind of guy I am. I like some things to be very obvious. And I didn't know that's how God was answering it, and I'm really sure to this day that's how he was. I ended up falling in my old barn. We had some steps in there, and I'd stepped over those thousands of times, I'm sure. And that day, whatever, I didn't lift my boots high enough, and I'm a big man. Down I came, and I landed right across on my chest here, right on, turned out my heart. And so I didn't think nothing of it. I just got back up and kept going, and we were actually on our way to see that farm that day. So we all got in the car and drove down, and it was everything that we thought about that it should be. And I felt a little bit sore and stiff the next day and didn't feel well, and not really sure why, but just shrugged it off because I had had a cold. I'm like, it's just the after effects of that. And the next day a little worse, and thankfully my wife said, you need to go to the hospital. So by then it was, of course, a Saturday, so we went to the emergency room, and the doctor went in there, and then she's like, yeah, your wife's probably right, it's probably from you falling. And so she said, just take it easy, but if it doesn't clear up, then go make an appointment with your family doctor. So probably the next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, because I'm a little bit stubborn, and especially about going to see doctors and things. Christine made an appointment for me with Dr. Adamson. I went to see him, and he's like, yeah, there's something wrong. So he gave me some pills, and I don't even remember what kind. Do that for a week and see how things go. And every day I would have a little bit less energy. It just was a real natural, slow degression, I guess, not a progression, of a little less energy, and I'd get tired much more easily. And so the only good thing was this was in the wintertime, so didn't have field work and stuff, just mostly chores. And after a week, we went back to the doctor and said, this isn't working, there's something wrong with me. So he gave me a different prescription of different pills, and he also got me an appointment with a heart specialist. And apparently there's one in Winchester, which I never knew. But so took those, and same thing every day, just got a little bit weaker. And my sister ended up, she had worked for us for years. She usually always came after morning chores. And she soon started having to come help me doing chores in the morning because I didn't have enough energy to do it. And like some of my other friends stepped in. I still remember Al came one morning before work, and he brought me coffee, which most people know that I love coffee. And I couldn't even drink that. And he's like, there's something really wrong with you, man, if you don't like coffee anymore. And I said, well, we're going to go see this heart specialist. We'll see. Because at this point, where everyone was starting to get more concerned because no clue what was wrong with me. So we went. I saw this heart specialist lady, and she gave me one of those patches that you put on, nitroglycerin patch or whatever, which is supposed to make your blood thinner and take it easier on your heart. Because she goes, there doesn't seem anything wrong with you. And I don't know how many of those heart tests they put all the little stickers on you, EKGs or something, I think they're called. I must have had 4 or 5 of those, and always my heart was working great, which was what was puzzling them. They couldn't figure what was wrong. So she gave me this nitroglycerin thing, and she goes, so tomorrow morning you get up, have it set right on your night table beside your bed, put it on before you even get out of bed. So I actually remember that the next morning, did that, got up, went about my day, and well, it's it thins your blood. And that day, probably around 10 o'clock in the morning right here, I was really feeling tough. And my dad and mom, well, I farmed with them, and Christine, of course, and my sister, Dad was getting really concerned for me, and Mom finally said, well, you better go see him and tell him. And this was on I went to the heart specialist on a Friday. It was on a Saturday just before Easter. And he came and saw me, and he's like, I think you better go back to the hospital. I'm like, well, I've been there about 10 times now, and it hasn't helped, so I don't think I'm going to go. And I had no energy. I didn't want to do anything. And he's like, well, you look pretty rough, so you better go. And somewhere in my brain, I remember kind of thinking, if my dad's telling me to go to the hospital, I must look, and he must be pretty sure, because my dad probably likes doctors even less than I do. So I said, well, do you think they'll give me oxygen? Because I said, I have no energy. It's almost hard work to breathe. And he goes, I think they'll give you oxygen. I think he just said that just to get me to go. But he was right. They did. And so I got up and I said to Christine, will you drive me to the hospital? And she was quite happy to do that, of course. And I remember looking in the mirror and I didn't recognize myself. I looked so gray. And anyway, so she brought me, and that's still before they did the renovations at Winchester Hospital. So there's a little pathway, probably about the distance from where I'm standing to the Go Hut. And she dropped me off right at the edge of it, and I slowly shuffling up. And a lady was walking with her baby. She came behind me and passed me, and then she looked back at me. She went to the door and held the door open for me to let me go before her and her baby. And I said, I must be in tough-looking shape which is fair. A mom always wants what's best for her little kid first, right? And so I shuffled in the counter, and they put me in they say, well, we have no rooms, hospital's jammed up, but we can get you a bed in the hallway. You'll have to lay in the hallway. And I'm like, that's fine as long as I can lay down, because I couldn't stand, and it was almost too much work to sit. And so then they started doing some more tests on me, and they knew there was something wrong with me, so they all of a sudden had a room for me. And I guess my temperature was out of whack, and some of the other tests showed some not favorable things. I'm not really sure, because I wasn't very clear in my mind at that point. And so they all of a sudden had room for me. So I was in a room, and they put me on oxygen, which helped because I could feel better. And then next thing you know, they took everybody else out of the room, and I had my own private room because they knew there was something wrong. And then and it took me a lot of years to forgive this one doctor, but I was really upset with him because he asked me if I was on drugs. And I'm like, well, only the stuff that the doctor gave me. He's like, well, have you ever done any illegal drugs? And I'm like, no, I just told you that. Well, have you ever done any illicit drugs? And at that point, I was clear enough in my mind, and like I said before, I'm pretty stubborn and strong-headed sometimes. I said, listen, buddy, I said, if you don't quit messing around and asking me the same question, I'm going to die, and it's going to be your fault. I said, I told you I never took drugs. I said, I'm 33 years old. I never took drugs even in high school. I said, I'm happily married. Why would I do that and screw my life up now? But I said, we don't have much time here, and you're just wasting it with this. So he looked over at the nurse, and he's like, I don't know what's wrong with this guy. Take him to the Heart Institute, which turned out to be a good thing. So it was about midnight at this point, and they threw me in an ambulance and took me off to the Heart Institute. And a doctor was working on me, and he's doing ultrasounds on me and checking everything out. And so about 4 o'clock in the morning, because I would fall asleep and wake up, and he was still poking and prodding away. And he goes, well, I got good news and bad news. I said, well, what's the bad news? He goes, well, the bad news is I don't know what's wrong with you. I said, well, what's the good news then? He goes, whatever you have, you're not going to die from it tonight. I said, well, that is good news. So the way it works at the Heart Institute, they usually come around with a team of doctors because it's a training hospital too. So there's student doctors and then some kind of more middle-aged doctor and then usually an experienced one. But because it was a Sunday, it was Easter Sunday, they just came with 2 doctors, an older one and a younger doctor, no students. And they looked around and they looked at my chart and they looked things over and I could see from their faces they didn't know what's wrong with me. And then all of a sudden, and to this day I'm still sure the Holy Spirit revealed that to the younger doctor. All of a sudden he just pointed his finger at me. He's like, I think I know what's wrong with this guy. He's got internal bleeding. And so they gave me a drug that we use on cows too. It's a muscle expander called dexamethasone. And your heart's a muscle, right? So it expands your muscle and it would stop the bleeding. That was the theory. So that's what they did. And right away, a nurse came later and brought me the stuff at about 10 o'clock that morning. And by lunchtime, I could tell I was starting to feel better now. They had figured out. And that was really an amazing thing. And just, I don't believe in coincidence. It was an act of God that they figured that out because so many people, so many different times had checked out, tried to see what was wrong with me, and no one could figure it out. But and through all that time, I remember our church family was praying for us. Our kids were at the Christian school; they were praying for us. my own physical family, whatever you want to say, was praying for us, and that means a lot. Then you really know when you're part of a community, and whenever everyone can show you God's love. And for someone like myself, it's always easy for me to help someone and to show love. It's a lot harder to receive it. But that was really something that made it clear to me. That's how God sees us, and He wants to show us love like that. And that really had a huge impact on me. So thankfully, yeah, I'm here today because of you guys' prayers, and I can pass that on. Some of you guys didn't even know me back then, probably. But that's all what's so amazing about God's family. It does pass on like that through generations. So, yeah, I apologize. I'm choking up a bit, but yeah, it was obviously that was a big deal. And I remember being part of a small group. We started out as college and careers, and a lot of our friends are still part of that church from that. And now a lot of them turned into our men's group. It's really important to be part of a group like that and to have those intimate friendships. That's your opportunity to learn and grow and to sometimes challenge each other, but also to come alongside each other, right? And help each other grow and build each other up. So anyway, that's probably enough about me for today, but thank you, and thank you for allowing me to share the testimony. And yeah, I just want to encourage you, if you're not part of a small group, become part of one, or if there's one that doesn't, something that suits your needs, start one. There's lots of good materials on right now, media. I like to think the elders are pretty